Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the WOW History Channel, where each week I try to bring you some historical item that will make you say, wow, I never knew that, or that's not the way it was taught to me in school. This week, I'm going to do something a little bit different. The last two episodes have been about slavery related subjects. This time, I'm going to do a topic about numismatics or coin collecting. Most of my adult life has been involved in numismatics. As you can see by all these books behind me, these are rare coin reference books. And today I do a lot of writing about American coins in particular. One of the books that I wrote several years ago was this one right here. It's called The 100 Greatest Women on Coins. And in it, I wrote about women who had appeared on coins who had some sort of impact on history for whatever reason, political, as a ruler. There's a reason that they're on the coin. And one of the coins that I wrote about was a coin that had a picture of Alice Paul on it. And I go, who the heck is Alice Paul? I'd never heard of her before, and you may not have either. But so today we're going to look at Alice Paul and why she is on this particular coin. The coin that she appears on is a 2012 first spouse coin, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about what those are. In 2005, the Congress passed legislation to create a presidential dollar, and the goal was to promote knowledge about the presidents. And they actually noted in here in the legislation, I'm reading directly from it. Many people cannot name all the presidents, and fewer can name the spouse, nor can many accurately place each president in the proper time period in American history. And the second part of it was that first spouses have not generally been recognized on American coins, which is true. So the goal of this was to create an educational tool where the public can look at a coin and say, oh, George Washington was president from when to when, and he was the first president. So it's a way to teach people using coin. For each president, they had a corresponding first spouse coin or the first lady. So George Washington had Martha Washington, John Adams had Abigail Adams, and so on. But what do you do with a president that didn't have a spouse? He wasn't married, or he might have been a widower at the time he was president. So the legislation provided that for any president that had no wife or spouse, that they would use the design of a coin that appeared during their term of office. So, for instance, for Thomas Jefferson, they took a portrait known as a draped bust of Liberty. It's a female form, which appeared on virtually all U.S. coins at the time, and they put that as his design for his first spouse coin. They go on down the line, and they finally come to Chester Arthur, who was a widower. He had no wife, so instead of using the design of the coin during his term, the legislation specifically provided that Alice Paul would appear on the coin. Why Alice Paul? Alice Paul was not related to Chester Arthur in any way. In fact, she was never met him, never knew him. She was a suffragette, who was instrumental in getting the 19th Amendment passed that allowed women the vote. So the decision to put Alice Paul on a coin was purely political. It was guided by whoever influenced the legislation. They wanted to do something political. It's the only first spouse coin that was treated that way, and it has specific legislation that says it's going to be Alice Paul. The presidential dollars are very common. You'll see them in circulation if you ever handle dollar coin. You'll get them if you use vending machines, some sort of parking meters. They're occasionally given out in change. They're not used a lot. They're not really promoted a lot. but you'll occasionally come across first presidential coins, Sacagawea dollars, and other ones that have been issued subsequently. So the first spouse coin is even harder to find. And the reason for that is because the first spouse coins are made of half an ounce of pure gold. So in order to even get one, they're very expensive. And unless you're a coin collector, you probably don't even know about them. You've probably never seen them. So the likelihood of you running across an Alice Paul first spouse coin is probably pretty rare, but you need to know about them anyway. And that's one of the things that I've always loved about coins. I've learned so much about history and politics and economics and finance from coins, and I would never have learned about Alice Paul if it hadn't been for coin collecting. So let me get to the story about who Alice Paul is, because I had no idea, and this was one of the wow moments for me. Who is Alice Paul, and why is she important? The Alice Paul was a young woman who was highly educated. She got a degree in biology. She was at Swarthmore College. She eventually went on to get her PhD and actually a law degree. So she was highly educated, but she was a staunch radical feminist. She was radicalized in London when she went there to study for an advanced degree, and she met two ladies named Emmeline and Christabel Pankhurst. They were a mother and daughter. They were active in the suffragette movement in London, in Great Britain, and they had a brand of feminism that was very radical. They had no problem with, raising ruckuses and getting under the skin of the legislators over there. Alice Paul saw this, and she said this was so different than the approach that the Americans were taking. But in her time in London, she was imprisoned 3 times after having been arrested 7 times. And each time that she went in, she gave the prison guards and everyone there a heck of a time. One of the things that she did was go on hunger strike, and this was to get attention from the public about the seriousness of their approach to getting the women's right to vote. Another thing that she learned, is a wow moment for me, was she learned that if you immediately claim to be a political prisoner, that you would be treated differently than a regular prisoner. You would get a better cell, you would get better amenities, you were just treated differently and better if you just immediately called that out when you were arrested. So she did that, but in her 3rd imprisonment in London, that apparently didn't work too well for her, because she went on a hunger strike and they began to forcibly feed her. And they did that so that she could survive during her term of imprisonment, which was only a month, but you need food. Another thing that happened to her on her last imprisonment was that she refused to put on the prison garb, the prison uniform that we typically associate with prisoners. And the lady guards were unable to force her to do it, and so they called in male guards. Well, that got a lot of publicity, about a lot of negative publicity, because here you have these males forcing this young woman to strip and get into the prison garb. So that didn't go over very well. Once Alice came back to America, she began to pursue her PhD in economics, and she became active in women's rights issues over here, women's rights organizations over here. She had a bit of a argument with the National Women's Organization, because their approach to getting the vote was to work on a state-by-state basis. And many years earlier, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton had proposed a national constitutional amendment just to get it taken care of all at one time. But that was put on the a wayside and never got any traction. But then again, Alice reproposed it, and she was sort of laughed down by the National Women's Organization. But they eventually came around and decided that this was the best approach to getting the vote for women. In 1913, when Woodrow Wilson became president, on the day before his inauguration, Alice helped organize a women's march called the Women's Suffrage Procession, and it was this big parade down in Washington D.C. with bands, marchers. It was a big spectacle, and over 500,000 people came out to watch the parade. So this left a big impression on the politicians of the time. And one of the other problems with the parade was that there was not good police protection. I should say there was police neglect in the fact that, similar to some of the riots that we're seeing today in Portland and Seattle, the police are effectively not doing anything to stop the rioting or stop the fighting. And this is exactly the same case with this women's suffrage procession. As they were going down the parade route, people blocked the parade, and fights and rioting broke out. And it took the intervention of the National Guard to allow the women to complete their march. And again, Alice was continuing her radical brand of feminism, and she actually chained herself to the White House fence. Finally, in 1918, Woodrow Wilson had seen enough. He was progressive enough that he decided to promote a bill, and Congress passed a bill that would allow a constitutional amendment for suffrage, and that bill passed in 1920. So today, at the time of this video, this is the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment that allowed, or that gave women the right to vote. Another wow moment for me with Alice Paul was, I was reading that she was involved with the Equal Rights Amendment. And I remember the Equal Rights Amendment as a young boy in 1972 when there was a big push to get it passed. And I thought, well, wait a minute, Alice Paul was active in 1920. How could she be involved with the Equal Rights Amendment? Well, it turns out the Equal Rights Amendment was actually proposed by her and others in 1923. So it had been around for a long time, but she was a big proponent of it. And then I also learned that she was involved with promoting the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And I go, well, wait a minute, how old was Alice Paul? Well, it turns out that she died in 1977, so she came up through all this stuff. She saw it and was active in all of it. And when she died in 1977, she was 92 years old. So she had a full life of promoting women's rights, and she was instrumental in getting the 19th Amendment passed. And in fact, the Equal Rights Amendment was at one point named after her. They called it the Alice Paul Amendment. But of course, that was changed later on to the Equal Rights Amendment. So here is a connection between numismatics and this young lady named Alice Paul, who was such a powerful figure and who, because of radical feminism, probably was the reason that they got so much publicity and the politicians responded. The previous women who had been so instrumental in working towards suffrage, their approach just seemed to be inadequate. And that's not to take anything away from them, but sometimes it takes a little bit of radical action to get things done, and that's exactly what Alice Paul did. So I hope this is a wow moment for you, and I hope you investigate her further. Wikipedia has a very, very long article about Alice Paul, and she's a very fascinating figure, and I hope you learn a little bit more about her, because she is a very important figure in the women's rights movement. So thank you all for viewing again, and if you like this channel, please subscribe and like, and if you would, please leave a comment below. I would love to find out what subjects you're interested in, so that I can create a video that can perhaps give you a wow moment about something in history that you probably have not learned before. So thank you very much again, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.